There's a particular kind of silence that settles over the mountains when the big snows come, not the peaceful quiet of a Christmas card, mind you, but the heavy, suffocating hush of a world cut off from itself, a silence that means isolation, a silence that, for the folks who lived in these hollers 130 years ago, could mean the difference between life and death. Picture it with me now. The year is 1895, maybe 1910. You're living in a clapboard cabin tucked so deep in the folds of these ancient mountains that the sun only touches your porch for about 4 hours a day, even in summer. Come January, when the snow starts falling, and I mean really falling, those gaps between the ridges fill up like God himself is pouring plaster into the cracks of the world. The horse can't pass. The wagon's been put up since November. That trail you could walk to the nearest settlement, it's gone. Buried under 3 feet of snow that's crusted over with ice, so thick you'd break through up to your hip with every third step. The nearest doctor, if you could even call him that, some circuit rider with a year of medical school and a leather bag full of mercury and optimism. He's a 3-day journey away, and that's in good weather. Welcome back to Legends from the Holler. When the fever comes, when the baby takes sick, when your husband splits his hand open with a felling axe and the wound turns angry and red, when your daughter's cough goes from dry to wet to bloody, when winter tries to take what's yours, what do? You send for the granny woman, the healer in the holler. She's got no degree, no certificate hanging on any wall. What she's got is 40, 50, maybe 60 winters of watching, of learning, of being taught by women who were taught by women who were taught by women, stretching back so far that nobody remembers where the knowledge first came from. Some say it came from the old Celtic hedge witches. Some say it came from the Cherokee who walked these mountains first. Some say it came from God himself, whispered to Eve in the garden before everything went wrong. Don't matter where it came from. What matters is she knows. The granny woman carries a burlap sack that smells of earth and mystery. Inside, roots wrapped in cloth, bark strips tied with twine, leaves crumbled into small tins, seeds rattling in glass bottles. She carries a lantern because she travels in all weathers, all hours. She carries her knowledge in her bones, in the calluses on her fingers, in the lines around her eyes that speak of 1,000 nights sitting vigil beside the sick and dying. In our modern world, we look to the white coats and pharmacies as we should. We trust in antibiotics and x-rays and all the miracles of science. But back then, the mountain was the only drugstore. The forest was the only hospital. And the granny woman was the only doctor who could reach you when winter locked its jaws around the holler and wouldn't let go. She wasn't just a healer, understand? She was a midwife, bringing babies into the world with hands that had caught hundreds of squalling infants. She was a layer-out, washing the bodies of the dead and preparing them for burial. She was a counselor, listening to troubles that couldn't be spoken to the preacher. She was a keeper of secrets, a holder of prayers, a walker between worlds. And every remedy she carried in that burlap sack had a story, had a purpose, had power if you knew how to unlock it. Let me tell you about 3 of them. 3 teas that kept the holler alive when death came knocking with the winter wind. Come February, come March, there was a belief deep in these mountains that your blood had thickened over winter. All that heavy food, the pork fat and cornbread, the leather breeches, beans and sorghum molasses, all those months spent closed up in the cabin, breathing smoke from the fireplace, not moving much, not sweating. The old folks said your blood got sluggish, got dirty, got full of winter's poison, and when spring tried to come but winter wouldn't quite let go, that in-between time, that's when people took sick. Fever would spike for no reason. Skin would break out in boils. Folks would get listless, couldn't hardly get out of bed, complained of a heaviness in their limbs. The remedy was sassafras tea, the great spring tonic. A granny woman knew where the sassafras grew, usually on the edge of the clearing or along an old logging road. She'd wait for the right sign, Many wouldn't dig their roots except when the moon was in the wane, believing that's when the power drew down from the leaves into the earth. She'd take her digging stick, work it around the base of a young tree, and pull up those roots that smelled of root beer and something wilder, something almost like licorice mixed with dirt and rain. She'd wash them careful, chop them into pieces, put them in a pot of water and let them simmer down until the water turned a deep red brown like old blood, like the color of iron rusting. The taste? Lord, it was good, warm and sweet and spicy all at once. Nothing bitter about it. Children would drink it without complaint. Rare for any medicine in those days. You'd drink a cup every morning for a week, maybe 2 weeks. Let it thin your blood, as they'd say. Let it break up the winter that had settled in your veins. Now, here's what we know today, with our chemistry and our laboratories. Sassafras contains a compound called safrole. The old-timers, they didn't know about safrole, but they knew sassafras made you sweat, made you urinate, made things move in your system. In essence, it was a diuretic and a diaphoretic, forcing your body to flush itself out. But here's the thing you need to understand, and understand it well. A granny woman's eye could tell a healing root from a deadly one, a skill lost to most today. We now know that safrole in large concentrated amounts can be harmful. The FDA banned it in commercial root beer back in 1960 for a reason. So never forage what you don't know, and always heed your modern doctor's word. The wisdom of the elders is for honoring and understanding, not for replicating in your kitchen without proper knowledge. The granny women used it because they had no choice, because it worked, in the context of their world, with their understanding. They also used it in moderation, in season, with prayer and intention, because the tea alone wasn't enough. As she brewed it, the granny woman would speak over it, sometimes the Lord's Prayer, sometimes the 23rd Psalm, sometimes words older than Scripture, passed down in whispers, as this root came from the earth clean. Let this body be made clean. As this water was drawn from the good spring, let health spring forth. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. The ritual mattered as much as the remedy, maybe more. Down by the branch, that's what they called the small streams that fed the creeks. There grew a plant that most folks walked right past without noticing. Low to the ground, inconspicuous, with leaves that looked like a dozen other woodland plants. But if you dug down to its roots and scraped away the outer bark, you'd find it. A brilliant golden yellow color, bright as a thread of sunlight, glowing like there was fire trapped inside the wood. Yellowroot, Xanthorrhiza simplicissima, if you want to get scientific about it. But no granny woman ever called it that. They called it gold thread, mouth root, bitter root, yellow Indian paint. This was the medicine you reached for when things got serious. When a child had thrush so bad their mouth was coated white and they couldn't eat. When a sore throat turned into something worse, something that made swallowing feel like trying to gulp down broken glass. When infection set in deep, in a tooth, in the gums, anywhere that needed nature's antiseptic, delivered strong and sure. The granny woman would dig the roots, again often by the signs, often with prayer, and she'd scrub them clean in the creek water. Then came the brewing. This wasn't like sassafras, something you could simmer. Gentle yellowroot needed to be extracted. She'd chop those roots fine and steep them hard in boiling water, or sometimes in whiskey if the situation was dire enough and whiskey could be spared. The result was a liquid the color of strong tobacco spit. And the taste, sweet Jesus, the taste. Bitter doesn't even begin to cover it. This was the kind of bitter that made your whole face pucker, that made your tongue try to crawl back down your throat to escape. That lingered for hours, no matter how much water you drank after. But it worked. God help us, it worked. For thrush, you'd have the child swish it around their mouth and spit, or sometimes swallow if they could bear it. For sore throat, you'd gargle with it, letting that golden bitterness coat every raw surface. For infected wounds, you'd make it strong and use it as a wash, cleaning out the corruption before it could spread. What the old-timers knew by experience, science would later confirm. Yellowroot contains berberine, a powerful alkaloid with genuine antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties. It really did kill bacteria. It really did reduce infection. The bitterness they endured had purpose. But again, and I cannot stress this enough, we're talking about a time and place where there were no alternatives, where an infected wound could kill you in a week, where a thrush could starve an infant. These women used what the mountain provided because that was all there was. Today we have antibiotics. We have antiseptic mouthwashes formulated in clean laboratories. We have options that don't involve choking down something that tastes like the forest's revenge. Never attempt to self-treat serious infections with foraged plants. Never give untested remedies to children. A granny woman spent decades learning to identify plants, to prepare them correctly, to dose them safely. She learned from masters who had learned from masters. That chain of knowledge is broken now for most of us, and that's why we have doctors, pharmacists, and medical science. But knowing what our ancestors did, understanding the depth of their knowledge and their desperation, that matters. That's worth remembering. The granny woman would sit up all night with a fevered child, giving yellowroot tea by the spoonful, wiping their brow with cool cloths, praying without ceasing. Sometimes the child lived, sometimes they didn't. But she tried. With everything the mountain gave her, she tried. Not every ailment came from infection or fever. Sometimes what ailed you was simpler and somehow worse. The bone-deep cold of an Appalachian winter that settled into your chest and wouldn't leave. The kind of cold that made every breath an effort. The kind that came with a cough that rattled around inside your ribcage like stones in a jar. The kind that brought a darkness of spirit along with the darkness of the season. For this, there was Spicebush, Lindera benzoin, the fragrance of the woods. A shrub that grew in the damp places near streams and in ravines where the morning mist hung thick. In winter, when everything else was dead or dormant, the spicebush twigs remained fragrant. Break one and it released a smell like allspice and cloves and something indefinably green, the smell of life persisting despite the cold. The granny woman would gather these twigs, sometimes mixing in the dried berries, if she'd had the foresight to collect them in the fall. She'd break them into pieces and steep them into a tea that was lighter than sassafras, less punishing than yellowroot, but warming in a way that went beyond just physical temperature. Spicebush tea was for sweating out a cold, as they said. You'd drink it hot as you could stand, and then pile under the quilts. Within an hour, you'd be soaked with sweat, your body's fever breaking, the congestion in your chest loosening. You'd cough and cough, bringing up all the winter that had settled in your lungs, until finally you could breathe clear again. But it was more than that. On those long February days when the snow had been on the ground for 8 weeks, and you couldn't remember what green looked like, when cabin fever had everyone snapping at each other, when the darkness seemed like it would never end, that's when the granny woman would bring spicebush tea, just because. "This'll raise your spirits," she'd say. And somehow it did. The warm, spicy smell filling the cabin, the heat spreading through your belly, the taste reminding you that spring would come eventually, that the earth wasn't dead, just sleeping, that you'd survive this winter like you'd survived all the others. Modern analysis tells us that spicebush contains compounds similar to those found in bay leaves and sassafras. Aromatic oils that do indeed help break up congestion and encourage sweating. The warming sensation comes from these volatile oils stimulating circulation. The uplift in mood, that's harder to quantify, but anyone who's ever cradled a cup of hot, fragrant tea on a miserable day knows it's real. And like our other remedies, it came with caveats that we must honor today. The knowledge of proper identification, proper preparation, proper dosage. These things took years to learn and aren't easily replicated from a video or a book. The granny women knew which shrubs grew in clean water and which grew in tainted soil. They knew how strong to brew it for a child versus an adult. They knew when tea alone wouldn't be enough, and it was time for more drastic measures. We romanticize these old ways at our peril if we forget they were born of necessity, not choice. But we honor them when we remember that they worked, within their context, and that the women who wielded them were as skilled in their craft as any doctor in any city hospital. More skilled in some ways, because they had to be. Because there was no backup, no second opinion, no ambulance coming over the ridge. Just her, the mountain, and the knowledge carried in her bones. The granny women of Appalachia never asked for recognition, never expected statues or history books. They did what needed doing because someone had to do it, and they had the knowledge. They walked through blizzards to deliver babies. They sat up all night with the dying. They brewed their teas and spoke their prayers, and held the holler together with calloused hands and indomitable will. Most of them couldn't read or write. Most of them lived their whole lives within a 20-mile radius. Most of them died poor, forgotten by everyone except the families they'd saved, the children they'd caught, the fevers they'd broken. Today, we have the luxury of choices they never had. We have emergency rooms and urgent care clinics. We have antibiotics and antivirals and pain medications that actually work. We have trained doctors and nurses who've spent years learning their craft in sterile classrooms and clean hospitals, and we should use them. God, yes, we should use them. Every fever doesn't need sassafras. It needs Tylenol and a doctor's examination. Every infection doesn't need it needs antibiotics prescribed by someone who knows what they're doing. Every cough doesn't need Spicebush. It needs proper diagnosis and treatment. But we should also remember, should understand, should honor the quiet backbone of Appalachia. Those women who kept the holler alive with nothing but wisdom and will and whatever the mountain provided. Their pharmacopoeia was written in frost and firelight. Their textbooks were the changing seasons and the patterns of growth and decay. Their laboratory was the forest itself. Their success rate would make a modern doctor weep. Not because they failed so often, but because they succeeded so much with so little. The big snows still come to these mountains, but now when they do, we have plows and cell phones and helicopters that can reach even the deepest hollers. We don't need the granny woman's burlap sack anymore, but we remember it. We remember her. We remember that before all our modern miracles, there was knowledge. Old, deep, hard-won knowledge that kept our ancestors alive through winters that would have killed them otherwise. Thank you for watching Legends from the Holler. If you found this deep dive into how our grandmothers cared for the sick in winter interesting, please subscribe. I love reading your thoughts, so tell me in the comments, what remedies did your grandmother use? Do you have some that have been passed down from generation to generation? The winter pharmacopoeia is closed now. Its secrets mostly lost, its practitioners gone to their rest, but the mountains remain. And somewhere in the mist and the memory, you can still smell it. The fragrance of sassafras and yellowroot and spicebush, the scent of survival, the perfume of persistence, the smell of Appalachia itself.